The sound of gunfire split the night. A
Jenner's
full
ready,
moon
boys.
cast
Come and
cold
get it.
blue light over the blood-soaked snow, illuminating Ethan Blackwood as he knelt on one knee, crimson dripping from his shoulder. Three bandits surrounded him, weapons drawn. The leader, Maxwell, pressed a revolver against Ethan's temple, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "You Union boys always think you're better than everyone," Maxwell sneered, digging the barrel into Ethan's skin. "Thought you could protect her from me?" Lightning fast, Ethan's eyes locked with Sarah's terrified gaze across the yard. In that frozen moment, a decision passed between them. "I told you, boys," Ethan growled, voice steady despite the pain. "Nobody touches the girl." In one fluid motion, his hand moved to the Colt revolver at his side. 3 months earlier, the wind howled across the plains of Arizona territory, kicking up dust devils that danced between the sagebrush. Late summer of 1879 was surrendering to an early autumn, and Ethan Blackwood could feel winter's approach in his bones. The sun bled crimson behind the hills as he drove the last fence post into unyielding ground, muscles burning with each strike of the hammer. At 45, Ethan wore his years like the weathered leather of his gloves, worn but sturdy. 14 years since he'd returned from the war between the states, carrying more wounds inside than out. 14 years of quiet and solitude, rebuilding a life from the broken pieces left behind. He straightened, wincing as his back protested. His ranch wasn't much. A modest house, a barn that needed work, a dozen head of cattle, and 3 good horses. It sat 20 miles from Silver Creek, the nearest town, close enough to trade when necessary, far enough that most folks left him be. Ethan read the sky with the practiced eye of a man whose life depended on weather. The wind had shifted, carrying the unmistakable scent of coming rain. A storm was brewing earlier than expected, the kind that could turn deadly without warning. He gathered his tools, whistled for his blue heeler, Scout, and headed toward the house. He had just stoked the fire and set water to boil when he heard it. A knock, soft and hesitant. His hand moved instinctively to the Springfield rifle propped by the door. Nobody ventured this far out, especially not with a storm building. The knock came again, weaker this time. Scout growled low. Ethan grabbed the rifle, opened the door a crack, and found himself looking down at a young woman who seemed ready to collapse on his porch. She couldn't have been more than 19, rail thin, her clothes worn nearly through, clutching a cast-iron pot to her chest as if it anchored her to the world. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, but there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of steel beneath the surface. "I don't talk much, mister," she said, voice barely audible above the wind, "but I can cook." Ethan stood frozen. He glanced past her, searching for others, but saw only the empty trail and the approaching wall of dust. No horse, no wagon. "Where'd you come from?" he finally asked. "East," was all she said, swaying slightly. "Got folks looking for you?" Ethan asked, eyes narrowing. She shook her head once, knuckles white around the handle of that pot. Something in her desperate eyes sparked a memory, the reflection of his own gaze in stream water, years ago, when he'd first returned from war. The look of someone who'd seen too much, who'd run until running was all they knew. "There's a storm coming," he said gruffly, stepping back from the door. "You can stay the night, just the night. Then you head on to town." Relief washed over her face, but she didn't smile, just nodded once and stepped inside. "Name?" he asked. "Sarah. Sarah Hopkins." Ethan led her down the hall to a room at the back of the house. He pushed open the door, revealing a space frozen in time. A neatly made bed, a brush on the dresser, a faded daguerreotype on the nightstand. "You can sleep here," he said, not meeting her eyes. She glanced at the room, understanding dawning. Whose room was this? Ethan's jaw tightened. "My wife's, Clara." He paused, the name still difficult after all these years. Fever took her in 74. Sarah's eyes moved to the portrait, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. I'll keep it clean, she said softly. I promise. Ethan nodded and left her there, closing the door firmly behind him, trying to ignore how the house already felt different with someone else inside its walls. The storm hit with unexpected fury, bringing not just dust but driving rain that turned to sleet as the temperature plummeted. By morning, an early snowfall had blanketed the ranch in white, unusual for this early in the season. Ethan woke before dawn, his routine unchanged despite the visitor. He built up the fire, put coffee on to boil, and was lacing his boots when he smelled it. Bread, fresh bread. He found Sarah in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her arms. The space had been transformed. Counters that had gathered dust for years gleamed clean. Pans hung neatly on hooks. The hearth, cold for so long, crackled with steady flame. You've been busy, he said, startling her. She turned, uncertainty flickering across her face. I hope you don't mind. I woke early and thought, it's fine. His gaze moved to the loaf cooling on the counter, the scent filling the room with memories he tried to bury. You weren't lying about cooking. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No, sir. I don't lie. Ethan glanced out the window at the heavy snow. Can't get you to town in this. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Relief flickered in her eyes before she could hide it. I can earn my keep, she said quickly. I can cook, clean, mend. We'll see. He cut her off, uncomfortable with her eagerness. I've got work in the barn. He spent the morning repairing tack, the familiar work of his hands keeping his thoughts from straying to the girl in his house. It was nearing noon when Scout barked a warning. Moments later, he heard the approach of hooves crunching through snow. Blackwood! You still breathing in there? Ethan emerged from the barn to find Tom McGregor dismounting from his buckskin gelding. At 65, McGregor was the closest thing Ethan had to a friend, a former buffalo hunter turned rancher who lived 5 miles north. McGregor, Ethan nodded. What brings you out in this? Storm caught me by surprise. The older man stamped snow from his boots. Figured I'd check on you, see if you needed anything. As they entered the house, McGregor stopped short at the sight of Sarah standing by the stove, a pot of stew simmering beside her. Well now, he said, eyes widening. Who might this be? Sarah Hopkins, Ethan said tersely. Passing through. Storm caught her here. McGregor removed his hat, nodding politely to Sarah. Ma'am, Tom McGregor. Pleased to meet you. Sir, she acknowledged. There's stew, if you're hungry. Smells better than anything this old grouch has cooked in years, McGregor grinned. Over bowls of rabbit stew, McGregor shared news from Silver Creek. Harkin's gang hit the stagecoach yesterday, he said, voice dropping low. Shot the driver, made off with the railroad payroll. Ethan frowned. Thought they were operating further south. Were. Now they're here. McGregor's expression darkened. Sheriff's putting together a posse, but he shrugged, the gesture saying everything about the sheriff's effectiveness. When McGregor mentioned Harkins, Ethan noticed Sarah's hands tighten around her spoon, though her face remained carefully neutral. After McGregor left, promising to return in a few days, Ethan found Sarah washing dishes, her movements mechanical, her eyes distant. You know something about the Harkins gang? He asked bluntly. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, not them. But you're running from something. It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands stilled in the soapy water. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, his name is Cyrus Maxwell. He owns the bakery where I worked in Junction Hollow. She swallowed hard. My parents died when I was 16. Pa in a mining accident. Ma from consumption before that. Maxwell took me in, gave me work. Her voice hardened. Then he started coming to my room at night. Said I owed him. When I refused, he got violent. I broke his nose with a rolling pin and ran. That was 3 months ago. He looking for you? I don't know, maybe. Her eyes met his, suddenly fierce. I'm not going back. No, Ethan agreed, surprising himself. You're not. The following days fell into an unexpected rhythm. The snow continued, sealing them in a quiet world of white. Ethan showed Sarah how to clean and load his Springfield rifle. Just in case, he said. She taught him to knead bread dough, laughing despite herself at his clumsy attempts. One evening, sitting by the fire, Sarah noticed a worn leather-bound book on the mantel. You read? She asked, gesturing to it. Ethan nodded. Clara taught me. Never had much schooling before her. Sarah's expression softened. What was she like? Your wife? Ethan stared into the flames, silent for so long, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Kind, he said finally. Smarter than me by miles. Loved this land even when it was cruel. He ran a hand through his graying hair. She'd have liked you. Similar spirit. It was the most he'd said at once since Sarah arrived. And the words hung in the air between them. Not quite an offering, but no longer a wall. A week into the snowstorm, McGregor returned unexpectedly, his expression grim. There's trouble, he said without preamble. Man named Maxwell's in town, asking questions about a girl, offering a reward. Ethan's hand tightened on the doorframe. He alone? No. Got 2 men with him. McGregor hesitated. Well-dressed for these parts, claims to be a legitimate businessman, says the girl stole from him. Ethan glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah worked, out of earshot. What's your read on him? McGregor's weathered face hardened. Snake oil in a fancy bottle, but he's got Sheriff Wilson eating out of his hand. He lowered his voice. There's more. He had drinks with Harkins last night at the saloon. Harkins? Ethan's blood ran cold. You think they're working together? Don't know. But Harkins hit the Carson place yesterday. 2 men dead. The Carson ranch lay between Ethan's property and town, closer than comfortable. They're moving this way, Ethan realized. That night, after McGregor had gone, Ethan stood on the porch watching the moon rise over the snow-covered hills. The cold air burned his lungs, but he welcomed it, needed the clarity it brought. Sarah joined him, wrapped in a blanket, her breath clouding in the frigid air. I heard, she said quietly, about Maxwell being in town. Ethan nodded. I could go, she offered. Leave at first light, draw them away from here. And go where? She had no answer. You've got 2 choices, Ethan said, voice firm. Run forever or stand your ground. I've tried running. Doesn't work. The moon cast long shadows across the snow as they stood in silence. Why are you helping me? Sarah finally asked. Ethan considered the question, looking out over the land he'd fought to build into something more than just a place to die. Because there was a time nobody would help me, he said simply, and because some men need to be taught they don't own the world. The attack came at dawn 2 days later. Ethan was in the barn checking on a pregnant heifer when he heard the first shot. He grabbed his rifle and peered through a crack in the barn door. 3 riders approached from the east, firing as they came. Sarah, he shouted, sprinting for the house. He found her already at the window, the Colt in her hands. I'm here, she called, her voice steadier than he expected. The riders circled the house, whooping and firing wildly, not aiming to hit, but to terrorize. Blackwood, one yelled. Send out the girl and we'll let you live. Ethan positioned himself at the front window, Sarah at the back. Not Harkins, he muttered. Maxwell's men, most likely. What do we do? Sarah asked. We hold, Ethan said. They're just testing us. They don't know how many people are in here. A bullet shattered the kitchen window. Sarah flinched but held her position. One rider dismounted, creeping toward the back door. Ethan saw Sarah's hands shake as she raised the revolver. Steady, he whispered. Wait till you're sure. The door handle turned slowly. The moment the door began to open, Sarah fired. The man yelled, clutching his arm, and stumbled back. Good shot, Ethan nodded. The wounded man retreated, and the riders pulled back, conferring briefly before galloping away toward the east. They'll be back, Ethan said grimly, with more men next time. The sound of approaching hooves made them both tense again, but it was McGregor, riding hard toward the house. Heard shots, he panted. You all right? For now, Ethan replied, helping him inside. 3 riders. Scouting party, I think. McGregor nodded grimly. Maxwell's in town, bragging that he's going to get his property back. His gaze flicked to Sarah. Pardon, miss, his words, not mine. I'm nobody's property, Sarah said, voice tight with anger. No, you're not, McGregor agreed, but that won't stop him from trying. He turned to Ethan. He's definitely partnered with Harkins now. Promised him a cut of the railroad payroll if his boys help retrieve the girl. Ethan's jaw clenched. How many men does Harkins have? 8, maybe 10, plus Maxwell and his 2. A dozen men against 3, and one of those a girl with barely a week's practice with a firearm. The odds were worse than bad. You should go, Ethan told McGregor. This isn't your fight. The older man snorted. Like hell it isn't. Those bastards killed my friend Carson yesterday. Besides, he added with a grim smile, who else is going to keep you from doing something stupid? The next day dawned clear and cold. Ethan stood in the yard, sighting down the barrel of his Winchester as Sarah practiced shooting at bottles lined up on the fence. Remember, he instructed, breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze. Sarah nodded, her concentration total. She fired, the bottle exploded. Good, Ethan said. Again. By midday, they had fortified the house as best they could, boarding broken windows, moving furniture to create barricades, stockpiling ammunition. McGregor had ridden into town, disguised as a drifter, to gather intelligence. While waiting for his return, Ethan took Sarah to the root cellar beneath the house, showing her a narrow tunnel hidden behind shelves of preserves. Apache raids were common when I first settled here, he explained, lighting a lantern that illuminated the low dirt-packed passageway. Former owner dug this as an escape route. Leads to a cave in the hillside about 100 yards east. If things go bad, you take the bay mare and ride north to Flagstaff. McGregor's sister lives there. She'll help you. Sarah ran her hand along the rough-hewn wall. You've used this before? Once, Ethan said shortly. During the Johnston Range War in '71. She studied his face in the lantern light. You're not planning to escape, are you? Some things a man can't run from. Their eyes met in the dim light, something unspoken passing between them. Sarah stepped closer, her hand tentatively touching his arm. Ethan! Scout's barking interrupted whatever she might have said. They hurried back upstairs to find McGregor riding hard for the house, another horse in tow. They're coming, he gasped as they met him at the door. Maxwell's gathered every gun hand in the territory. 20 men at least, with Harkins leading them. They'll be here by nightfall. Ethan's stomach nodded. You see Harkins yourself? McGregor nodded grimly. Big man, scarred face, cold eyes. Saw him and Maxwell at the saloon, drawing up plans. Maxwell's been telling folks you kidnapped the girl, that she's touched in the head. What? Sarah's face flushed with anger. Man's spinning quite a tale, McGregor continued. Says you're his niece, ran away during a spell of madness. Got the sheriff believing it. 2. Ethan cursed. We need more guns. Way ahead of you, McGregor said, gesturing to the second horse loaded with rifles. Called in some favors from the mining association boys. They've no love for Harkins after he hit their payroll wagon. But even with the extra weapons, they were still hopelessly outnumbered. As night fell, they ate a tense meal by lamplight, the weight of what was coming heavy upon them. After dinner, McGregor stepped outside to check on the horses, leaving Ethan and Sarah alone by the fire. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, "for bringing this to your door." Ethan studied her across the firelight. In just 2 weeks, the hollow-eyed girl from the porch had begun to transform. There was color in her cheeks now, strength in the set of her shoulders. She had stopped flinching when he moved too quickly, had started to meet his gaze without fear. "My door's been waiting for trouble a long time," he said quietly. "At least this time, it's for something that matters." A gunshot shattered the moment. Ethan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Outside, McGregor shouted once, a cry cut brutally short. "Tom!" Ethan moved to the door, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Listen." In the silence that followed, they heard the soft crunch of footsteps in snow, the quiet murmur of voices. "They're surrounding the house," Ethan realized, using Tom as bait. He peered cautiously through a crack in the boarded window. In the moonlight, he could make out McGregor's form slumped in the snow, blood darkening his shirt. Behind him, half hidden in shadows, waited armed men. "Is he?" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "I don't know." Ethan's mind raced. "They want us to rush out, make ourselves targets. What do we do?" Ethan checked his ammunition, his face grim in the firelight. "We give them what they're expecting, but not how they're expecting it." He positioned Sarah by the back window with the Springfield rifle. "When I give the signal, fire 2 shots out this window, then duck. They'll think we're both here. I'm going out the root cellar, coming around behind them." "That's suicide," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "Maybe, but we're dead anyway if we stay put." He hesitated, then touched her cheek briefly. "1 hour. If I'm not back, you go through the tunnel. Don't wait for me." Before she could protest further, he was gone, slipping through the kitchen to the trap door hidden beneath the pantry shelves. The root cellar was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old potatoes. Ethan moved silently through it to the narrow tunnel at the back. Emerging into the frigid night air 100 yards behind the house, he crouched low, scanning the darkness. He could make out 3 men positioned at the rear of the property, their attention fixed on the house. He gave the bird call, 3 short whistles, the signal for Sarah to create her diversion. Seconds later, 2 shots rang out from the back window. The men spun toward the sound, giving Ethan the moment he needed. He moved swiftly, taking the first man down with the butt of his revolver to the base of the skull. The second turned just in time to catch Ethan's fist in his face. The third managed to raise his gun, but Ethan was faster, his colt barking once in the darkness. The shot alerted the others. Shouts erupted from the front of the house, followed by the thunder of boots and snow. Ethan dragged the unconscious men into the shadows, retrieved their weapons, and moved toward the barn. McGregor lay where he had fallen, blood pooling beneath him. Ethan knelt beside him, feeling for a pulse. "Took your time," McGregor wheezed, his voice barely audible. "Save your breath, old man," Ethan muttered, relief flooding through him. He examined the wound, a bullet to the shoulder, bloody but not immediately fatal. "Can you move?" McGregor's answer was a pained grunt as he struggled to sit up. "Bastards! Shot me when I was checking the horses." A voice cut through the night, cultured and cruel. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe we got off on the wrong foot." Ethan peered around the edge of the barn. A man stood in the clearing before the house, tall, well-dressed despite the frontier setting, with a neatly trimmed beard. "My name is Cyrus Maxwell," the man continued. "I believe you're harboring my niece. Poor girl is unwell, has been since her parents' tragic deaths." "You lying snake," McGregor muttered. "People don't belong to people, Maxwell," Ethan called back, keeping his position hidden. Maxwell laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "In a perfect world, perhaps. But this is the frontier, Mr. Blackwood. Out here, a man takes what he wants and keeps what he takes." He gestured expansively. Now, I'm a reasonable man. Send Sarah out, and we'll call it square. I'll even pay you for your trouble. And if I refuse, then I burn this place to the ground with you in it." Maxwell's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Your choice." "Give me a minute to think it over," Ethan called, playing for time. He turned back to McGregor. "Can you make it to the house?" McGregor nodded grimly. "Just need a hand up." Supporting the older man's weight, Ethan helped him to the back of the house. Sarah opened the door, her face flooding with relief at the sight of them. "Tom," she breathed, helping Ethan maneuver him inside. "I'll live," McGregor grunted as they lowered him onto a chair. "What's the plan?" Ethan checked his ammunition. "Maxwell's out front with at least 4 men. I took out 3 in the back, but there could be more." "Harkins?" Sarah asked. "Haven't seen him yet," Ethan replied, "which worries me." A crash from upstairs made them all freeze. Footsteps sounded overhead. Someone had breached the upper floor while they were distracted. "Go," McGregor said, drawing his revolver with his good arm. "I've got this door." Ethan nodded, then headed for the stairs, Sarah close behind despite his gesture for her to stay. The upper hallway was dark, but a beam of moonlight spilled from Clara's open bedroom door. Inside, a man was rifling through the dresser drawers, his back to them. He turned at their approach, and Sarah gasped. "Hello, Sarah." Maxwell smiled, cold and satisfied. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" Ethan raised his Colt, but before he could fire, something hard struck the back of his head. Stars exploded across his vision as he fell forward, the gun clattering from his grasp. Through the haze of pain, he heard Sarah cry out, saw Maxwell grab her arm. 2 men appeared, one who had struck Ethan, another holding a revolver. "Harkins sends his regards," the armed man sneered, aiming at Ethan's head. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from the man's gun. He looked down in surprise at the red stain spreading across his chest, then collapsed. McGregor stood in the doorway, his revolver smoking, face pale with pain and determination. "Sorry I'm late," he managed before the second man tackled him. Ethan surged to his feet, ignoring the pounding in his skull. He threw himself at Maxwell, who still held Sarah in a vice-like grip. The impact sent all 3 of them crashing into the dresser. Sarah wrenched free, scrambling for Ethan's fallen Colt. Maxwell recovered quickly, drawing a small derringer from his coat. "You've cost me a great deal of trouble, Mr. Blackwood," he said, aiming at Ethan's chest. The shot that followed didn't come from Maxwell's gun. Sarah stood, Ethan's Colt steady in her hands, as Maxwell staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face as he clutched his bleeding side. "You!" he gasped, reaching for her. "I told you," Sarah said, her voice cold. "I'm not your property." Ethan retrieved his gun from her, keeping it trained on Maxwell as the man sank to his knees. "It's over, Maxwell." A laugh from the doorway froze them all. A new figure stood there, broad-shouldered, with a scarred face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Not quite," said Harkins, raising his own weapon. "See, Maxwell promised me something valuable for helping him. Since he's indisposed, I'll just have to take it all." Ethan positioned himself in front of Sarah, mind racing. McGregor was down, grappling with Maxwell's henchman. His own gun was empty after Sarah's shot. They were cornered. "You know," Harkins continued conversationally, "it's a shame about this place. Beautiful ranch. But accidents happen." He pulled a match from his pocket, striking it against the doorframe. "Like fires." Time slowed. Harkins flicked the match toward the bed. Ethan lunged for him. Sarah screamed. The dry bedspread caught instantly, flames racing across the fabric. Harkins and Ethan crashed to the floor, grappling for control of the gun. Smoke filled the room as the fire spread, catching the curtains, climbing the walls. Sarah dragged McGregor clear of the other fight toward the door. Harkins was stronger, younger, but Ethan fought with the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. He slammed Harkins' wrist against the floorboards until the gun clattered free. Harkins headbutted him, stars exploding across Ethan's vision again. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw Maxwell dragging himself toward the fallen gun. With a surge of strength, Ethan broke free from Harkins, diving for the weapon. Two shots rang out, so close together they sounded like one. Maxwell fell back, a look of surprise on his face, a red stain spreading across his chest. Harkins staggered, clutching his stomach, hatred burning in his eyes. "You're dead, Blackwood," he gasped. "My men will burn. Everything you love." "Your men already ran," Ethan said, struggling to his feet. "Cowards always do when the odds turn." The fire had consumed half the room, the heat intense. Ethan grabbed Harkins by the collar, dragging him toward the door where Sarah waited, supporting McGregor. Together they stumbled down the stairs and out into the cold night air, the upper floor of the house now fully ablaze. They collapsed in the snow a safe distance from the burning building, watching as flames devoured the home Ethan had built. Beside him, Sarah coughed, her face streaked with soot but alive. McGregor lay still, but breathing, the wound in his shoulder no worse than before. Harkins gave one final, rattling breath, then was still. The fire burned bright against the night sky, visible for miles across the empty plains. By morning, nothing would remain but ashes and memories. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. "You're home." Ethan looked at her, then at McGregor, then back at the burning house where he had lived alone with ghosts for too many years. "It was just a house," he said finally. "Home is something else." 3 months later, the spring sun warmed the freshly turned earth of what would become a garden. The new cabin wasn't as large as the old house had been, but it was solid, built by hands that knew their work. A barn stood nearby, horses nickering softly in the morning air. Ethan sat on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling beside him as he cleaned his revolver. Not out of fear anymore, just habit. The winter had been hard. The three of them crowded into McGregor's small ranch house while they rebuilt. But spring had come at last, bringing with it new beginnings. McGregor had returned to his own place the previous month, his shoulder healing well enough that he could manage alone again. He rode over every few days, bringing news from town and staying for dinner. The Harkins gang had scattered after their leader's death, most fleeing across the border into Mexico. Maxwell's bakery in Junction Hollow had been sold at auction, the proceeds divided among those he had cheated over the years. And Sarah had stayed. Through the long winter, through the rebuilding, through nightmares that still sometimes woke them both. She had refused to go to Flagstaff, refused to leave even when Ethan had given her the option. "I'm not running anymore," she had said simply. The door opened behind him and Sarah stepped out onto the porch, setting a fresh cup of coffee beside him to replace the cold one. "Bread's about done," she said, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "McGregor's riding in from the north." Ethan nodded, watching the distant figure approaching on horseback. "Town was quiet yesterday?" "Yes." Sarah had gone with him, her first trip back since that fateful night. She had walked with her head high, no longer afraid of shadows. "Mr. Davis at the general store asked if I'd be interested in supplying bread for his lunch counter." "You thinking about it?" She shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe. In time." They fell into comfortable silence, watching McGregor's approach. So much had changed in 3 months. The land around them was greening, cattle grazing peacefully where once they had fought for their lives. Sarah touched his shoulder lightly. "Coffee's getting cold again." Ethan caught her hand before she could withdraw it. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, perhaps something more that neither was ready to name yet. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the coffee?" she asked, though she knew that wasn't what he meant. "For staying," he clarified, "when you could have gone." Sarah's smile deepened, reaching her eyes now. I don't talk much, Ethan Blackwood, she said, echoing her words from that first night. But I'm exactly where I want to be. McGregor's voice called out a greeting as he approached the property line. Ethan stood, holstering his clean revolver, and stepped off the porch to meet his friend. Behind him, Sarah returned to the kitchen, where the scent of baking bread filled the air with the promise of home. As Ethan walked toward McGregor, he passed the newly planted fence post marking the boundary of their property. Hanging from it was a freshly painted sign bearing the words, Blackwood Ranch. Below it, in smaller letters, E&S Blackwood, proprietors. It wasn't official, not yet, but some promises didn't need papers to make them real. Some bonds formed in fire proved stronger than any forged in easier times. Ethan raised a hand in greeting to McGregor, the morning sun warm on his face, the weight of his past a little lighter with each passing day. Behind him stood a home built from the ashes of what was lost. Before him stretched a future he hadn't dared to imagine, and for the first time in longer than he could remember. That future looked like something worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience, redemption, and the courage to start anew, subscribe to Western Legends for more stories of the American frontier, where men of honor carved out their legacy in a lawless land, and where even the most wounded hearts could find healing in unexpected places. Next week, the Marshal's Oath. When an aging lawman is forced to pin on his badge one last time to protect a town that has forgotten his sacrifice, he must confront not only the outlaw gang threatening everything he loves, but also the son who has never forgiven him for choosing duty over family.